Brothers and sisters, Sunday after Sunday, we're treated to these wonderful Gospels from St. Mark. And here we are, still with Christ in Galilee, still near the beginnings of his public ministry. We're in the lakeside town of Capernaum, and what happens is framed within actual 24 hours. We see 24 hours of Jesus, as it were. We begin on the Sabbath, begin picking up from last Sunday when he's in the synagogue on Saturday morning. There Jesus takes part in the liturgy, teaches and encounters a man with an unclean spirit and sets him free. And then, always with his new companions, his new family, he leaves the synagogue and goes into the house of Simon and Andrew, there to spend the rest of the Sabbath. I don't know if any of you have ever been to Capernaum, but what is very reasonably believed to be the house of Peter is still there, and there's a kind of, it's called a memorial, it's a place of prayer, and it has a glass floor, and you can look down from above and see the house below, and also the remains of the first church that were built over it in the 5th century. These things aren't just figments of the imagination. So he and his companions go into the house of Peter and Andrew for the rest of the Sabbath, which wasn't a day for traveling. And here Jesus shows his power again. Simon's mother-in-law is in bed with a fever. We're in a family house. Jesus takes her by the hand and lifts her up, and the fever goes. She is, of course, the first woman to be healed in the gospel. In fact, the first person to be cured of an illness in the gospel. And the way that Mark describes it, it becomes clear she is having her own mini resurrection. He takes her by the hand and lifts her up. It's the same word as raises up. And the New Testament says the Father lifted up, raised Jesus in his resurrection. He was lifted up by the hand of the Father. And she begins to serve immediately, to prepare a meal. Now, the point isn't that a woman's work is never done. It's rather that serving is a sign of spiritual health. She's lifted up, she's raised up, and she begins to serve. As Jesus, again, is lifted up by his resurrection, and from heaven serves us with the meal of his body and blood, serves us with his Eucharist. As always in the Gospels, there's more going on. There's a transparency here. This is Peter's house. Well, we think of the church, surely. It's a first sketch of the future Christian community. Here is Christ. Here are the first disciple. Here's a woman restored to health. And here's service, diakonia, going on. So there's something coming to birth here, something taking shape here. Then the sun sets, evening falls. Now in the Jewish understanding, therefore, the Sabbath has come to an end. Day running from evening to evening, not morning to morning or midnight to midnight as with us. And so people are free to move. The first day of the week has begun on that Saturday evening. It's Sunday. And the people start to crowd round the door of Peter's house. Literally, they synagogue around the door because it's a form of the same word. And so again, Mark's listeners would think of themselves because this was what so marked out the early Christians. Jews gathered on a Saturday, they had their synagogue then. Christians gathered on a Sunday, the day of the resurrection. So here we are, just at the very beginning of Jesus' ministry, and yet we can see the future. We can see what is coming. And after all the healing that he does at that time, that evening and into the night, it seems, what happens next? And rising very early in the morning, Jesus goes out. Well, surely that's another echo, rising very early on a Sunday morning. So these Gospels are not just limited to once upon a time. What they describe is happening not just in Capernaum 2,000 years ago. They embrace us as well. We're inside the story. And I think it's worth dwelling a little on all the people around Peter's door. They're sick and troubled. So far on this day, Jesus had cast out one demon in the synagogue and cured one ill person, Simon's mother-in-law. Somehow, the social media must have been busy, and the whole place, the whole town knows there's something wonderful happening around Peter's house, healing and deliverance. And so the sick and the troubled gather. They gather round the door of Peter's house. This is the church that we see here. The church, not the gathering of the elect and the squeaky clean and the impeccable, but a crowd of people short on health and racked by their demons. This is us. The Holy Father likes to describe the church as a field hospital in the middle of a war. These are the types in and around Peter's house. Think of the crowds that gather in St. Peter's Square in front of his basilica. This is who we are, sinners in need of forgiveness. We're little sort of fragments of chaos on two legs, wondering if we'll ever fall into shape, but mysteriously drawn and hoping that Jesus will come through the door and put us right by his touch. Just to jump to Job and the first reading, Job the afflicted, letting out his great lament. Job was a great moaner, but he's not just moaning for Scotland, as it were. He's moaning for us all. It would be strange if there were times in our lives when we didn't feel like Job. But it's remarkable. The Bible, God's word, is large enough to contain what seems so ungodly a word, so despairing a word. I was struck just listening to the reading. We had Job moaning away and saying, I wish I didn't exist, and life is unbearable. And then we end off the word of the Lord. The word of the Lord. Well, Jesus in Peter's house is large enough to take in all the affliction around him. It's really, he exposes himself to it. It's the cross coming on him already, this wave of human need and sin and sorrow washing over him, as it washed over Job and as it flows over the world again and again. Risen, I think, how slowly evening comes, says Job. Restlessly I fret till twilight falls. Strange, isn't it, that it should be twilight and evening when Jesus heals in Capernaum, and it's just before them, twilight and evening, that he'll be taken down from the cross, and it's in the dark hour before the dawn that he will rise. Job was saying more than he realized. He heals the brokenhearted. he binds up all their wounds. Who are we? What are we? What is the church? Just the portion of wounded, broken-hearted humanity that has set their hope on Christ. We're just a Galilee, just a Capernaum, on whom it's gradually dawning that help is at hand, that the Lord will come through the door and heal us. I must move on, says Jesus, and preach elsewhere, for that's what I came for. And there's Paul in the second reading, 20 years later, saying, woe to me if I don't preach. Jesus preached, proclaimed the coming of the kingdom, the reign of God, and Paul, active after the first Easter, preaches the death and resurrection of Jesus. It's the same thing. It's all one, and it is what makes the difference. Life is what it is, and we are what we are, all at once, amazing creatures and poor wee things. Tell us about it, as they say. But a word has gone forth, a light has shone in Galilee, there's an empty tomb, a Sunday has broken, Peter's house is open, and we shall live.